We'll be going into the 7th episode of the Freelancer Masterclass, and we're going to talk a little bit about, I would say, a controversial topic, which is how to manage clients. But the controversial bit is, should we fire bad ones if we actually found any bad clients? So let's get started. So again, as I mentioned, I'd love to make this as interactive as possible. So feel free to interrupt me anytime you want. There is no such thing as a stupid question. If you have thought about it, I'm sure someone else somewhere has thought about it as well. And let's just open that and make it into a discussion. Before we begin, let's give me a chance a little bit to introduce myself. So I've been a freelancer for about 5 years. In the past 5 years, I've managed to turn my freelancing business into a 6-digit annual business. So I've been able to basically scale my business through other people, and I've been able to grow it organically. And I think the goal of me doing this session is really to share some of my learnings across the years and figure out a way to help other people, grow their freelance business into something that is really scalable as well. So that's really my goal. So from our past episodes, we've talked about quite a lot of different topics. I think some of the notable ones are setting up yourself as a freelancer and figuring out how you know how to sell your business and set up your services, figuring out ways to find your customers. And also we've talked quite a bit about how to strategize your pricing and proposal as a freelancer. And all of the past episodes are available on YouTube. So if you're interested in seeing and learning a bit more about the basics of being a freelancer, from figuring out how to package your services, whether you want to productize it or customize it, how to figure out what's the right pricing, and how do you find your clients, all of that has been uploaded to YouTube. So just find Ravenry on YouTube, and all the Freelancer Masterclass recording should be there. So let's begin with today's session. So there are 3 main things that I'd like to cover today. So one is a typical client issue in a project. And this is something that I've experienced throughout the years. So I've just consolidated all the things that has happened to me, and hopefully I can share some of the best practices around dealing with them. And finally, figuring out what to do with a client if they become overly, dependent, overly patronizing, micromanaging in your business. And that takes away your ability to really scale your business and basically do more and earn more. So how do you deal with clients like that? So we'll talk a little bit about that as well at the end of the session. So firstly, and I think this is really important as a bit of a disclaimer, it is always your responsibility, regardless of how your clients behave, okay, to make sure that they are set up for success. So I want to emphasize this. At the end of the day, you can blame your clients for being difficult. You can blame your client for being, not a good fit for you. But first and foremost, it is your responsibility as a business owner and as a problem solver to figure out a way to make sure that the engagement can be successful for everyone, right? So I just want to preface this entire presentation by saying that, so that we don't go out there and just say, oh, it's always the client's fault. No, first and foremost, let's figure out what's wrong with the way we do things and figure out if we can actually fix it from our perspective. If not, then we can actually start thinking about how do we actually remediate that situation with the client in a different way. So to understand really what are some of the challenges dealing with clients, it is very important for us to figure out what is a typical client journey, right, in freelancing business. So let's start there so that we understand the different stages of a freelancer's engagement with a client and figure out where in those stages typically we find issues and challenges. So in my experience, there's really 6 different stages when you engage with a client. Stage 1, 2, 3 are discovery, deliberation, and decision. So discovery is when you basically set up a meeting with a client, figure out what you do, what the client's problems are, and really understand, if you guys are a good fit for each other in terms of solving that problem, and if your services are going to be useful for them. The second thing is to go into deliberation with the client to discuss whether or not you are a good fit and whether or not you are able to have the resources, time, and capabilities to solve their problem. And this is usually when you will put together a proposal and the clients will go back and deliberate with their team and think about whether or not they want to work with you. And then the third stage in the sales process is really making that decision of whether or not they want to work with you. Usually the discussion of negotiation, like the scope, requirements, and the finalization of all these things will happen in the third stage. And so the first 3 stages of the customer journey is really more around like the sales process. And a lot of that centers around that discovery process, which is how you are able to understand your customer and their problems and their priorities. And at the same time, how you can actually express and share and communicate your capabilities to that customer to build credibility in front of them. So that's really the first 3 stages. The next 2 stages are when your project starts, basically. I kind of see it in 2 different phases. The first part is development, which is when you kind of like basically start working and executing and creating the solution or the deliverable that you promise your client. And the 5th stage is essentially delivery, when you present your output and your clients give you a revision. You will have a discussion about the output and like what changes they want to make. And then kind of like it just goes back to development. So delivery and development is a bit of a back and forth, but that is usually the kind of like the project execution stage in the customer journey. And then the 6th stage, it's usually the debrief. Debrief is essentially is a conclusion or concluding act of your freelancing engagement with the client. And usually that's the stage where you will review the results and whether or not that output that you've delivered to your client help them solve their problem, achieve the ROI that they want to achieve, and also talk a little bit about how the engagement has been, gather their feedback, and also for you to provide them with some feedback as a freelancer as well, and figure out if there is any other opportunities for you to kind of be better and to further explore other working opportunities with them. And that is why there is an arrow between 6 to 1, because usually during the debrief process, and that is the end of the project, that is actually a really good time for you to explore new opportunities with the client, because you've just finished one project, which means that typically the client will start looking at the next stage of their project and figuring out like who are the resources they want to bring in to solve that problem or in the next stage. And during the debrief process of your project, it's a great time to kind of enter that. So these are the 6 stages of a customer journey typically, and the client issues that you face will typically fall within one of these 6 stages. So let's kind of get into that in a bit more detail. So as I mentioned to you, I don't think I'm going to repeat this too much. There's really like 3 main stages or 3 main phases. The first one is sales stage. There are 3 steps, 2 steps for execution stage, and 1 step for review. So in my experience, these are the typical 4 client concerns that you'll face as a freelancer, okay? And this is the root, okay, of all client challenges and problems working with a client, okay? Well, I'm saying all, but I would say maybe like 90%, okay? I'm not going to say that I have covered everything. So just, like 90% of the problems you face will be anchored or be centered around these issues. The first one, and is usually the most obvious one, is around value. So, during an engagement process or during the sales process, one of the challenges you'll have with the client is in agreeing whether or not the value you bring as a freelancer fits with the budget or the price that you ask, right? And this kind of concern will usually continue beyond the sales process. So once you get into the discussion with the client, once you get like the project started, usually the client will still kind of go back to this one point and kind of ask themselves, is this really worth my money? Is this really a freelancer that I want to work with? And am I making the right choice, right? So usually this is something that will, a theme or a concern that will keep resonating throughout the engagement or throughout the customer journey. The second one will be centered around output, right? Output, again, this is very obvious, which is around, okay, you've produced some sort of work, whether it's a social media post, it could be, like an article. And usually the concern is around, okay, is this like output align with my expectation? Is this output meet all my requirements, right? At the same time, the clients may also consider output in the context of timeline. So is the freelancer delivering the work to me according to the timeline that we've agreed? Is this, fitting with my requirements or my needs, right? So that's the second typical concern or source of concerns that the clients have. The third one is around motivation. So motivation is the one that I would say a lot of people don't think about as much as a freelancer. So when a client engages with a freelancer, typically they have their own either personal or professional agenda, right? The most obvious one is obviously the professional agenda, which is, oh, I need to kind of like, grow my Instagram following. That's why I need to create like more social media posts. oh, I need someone to create a strategy for my, for my go-to-market, right, for new product. And therefore, that's kind of like my goal that I'm tracking, right? But sometimes the personal goals can trump very easily the professional goals. So the personal goals could be something like, I'm aiming for a promotion and I really need this project to go well so that I can get promoted, right? So understanding the dynamic beyond or beneath your project, right? Understanding like what your client's thinking about, what's their goal, what's their personal agenda, will really help you figure out why they're behaving in a certain way and why they're making life quote unquote difficult for you as a freelancer, right? So understanding that is really, really important. And as I kind of move into the best practices of client management, you'll see that I emphasize a lot on understanding this this kind of like particular item, which is where does your client come from? What's their personal agenda? What's their biggest worry and fear, right? So that is going to be very, very important for you. And that's a very important skill for you to be able to assess this as a freelancer. The fourth one is a bit of a boring one, but it's something that, again, like a lot of freelancers miss, which is a lot of clients' concerns actually stem or comes from the fact that there's no clear process of engagement with you, right? So when you work with a client, you may be like the best designer, right? You can create like maybe the best artwork or the best social media, Instagram post or video, right? The best one. But the challenge is that output is only seen at the end of the engagement. And in between your in between your sales process where you close a deal with the client and delivering that final output, the client is waiting and trying to figure out what is the progress, what is the update on the project, right? Now, a lot of freelancers always they often miss this step because they don't think that the process or having a clear process with the client is important. Whereas in my opinion and experience, it is actually one of the most important things to set up well so that the clients have confidence and they feel assured that you will be delivering the output as per agreed, right? So having a clear process usually will alleviate a lot of these concerns and client issues that you face as a freelancer. So these are the 4 typical concerns that I see clients have, and all of your client issues, well, 90% of your client issues will probably come from these 4 things. Now, the other thing to remember is this: try to empathize with your client, okay? No one is there to get you, okay? No one is there to make your life difficult. No one is out there to torture you and, make you, suffer as a freelancer, okay? No one is there with that intention. No one is working with you with that intention. So you need to kind of like cast that idea out of your head really early on, because that oftentimes makes freelancers very emotional, and they, you may feel and you may react to your client in a very, unprofessional way because you feel like it's a personal attack and you feel emotional about the whole thing. So first and foremost, you need to understand that, no one has that intention of basically ruining your life, okay? Especially a client. All they care about oftentimes is the 4 things that I mentioned earlier, which is, is it worth my money? Am I getting the output that I want? Is this, helping me with my personal goals or professional goals? And is the process of engaging with this freelancer give me confidence, right? That's all they can care about. So remember, no one is out there to get you. And therefore, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, your job is to manage your clients well, to make sure that they don't feel any of these concerns, right? So what are some of the best practices about doing that, right? So I would kind of usually see 3 different levels in terms of the way you engage with the client, right? So at the most basic level, as a freelancer, you want to meet all the requirements that you've agreed with the client, right? So this will be things like, meeting up, agreeing and aligning your output with the scope and making sure that you meet those requirements at a baseline, right? The second level is learning how to kind of build relationship with your client and figuring out a way to have that trust and that credibility established with them, because that will really help you kind of alleviate a lot of their concerns. Because once they trust you, then they know that, okay, like February will be able to deliver this, Rama will be able to do that. So there's not a lot of that fear that stems from an irrational source, right? So it's very important to kind of be able to build that relationship, and good freelancers do that really well. But the best freelancers, they're very anchored around achieving results for their client, right? So what do results mean? As I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit about motivation, right? Why the clients want to work with you. And while a lot of the times it may seem very, tactical or very obvious, which is like, oh, they just want like 5 different posts, they want 10 articles, they want, consultant to kind of help them with a strategy. It may seem like that, but the reality is there's a lot of underlying motivation that could be personal in nature. So understanding like, what those are and helping them actively achieve those results is like, the most important thing for a client, right? So as much as possible, you want to kind of get to that top of the pyramid and achieve the results for your client. So just to give you some examples of, like how this look like, right? So for example, for a social media design project, right? So basically this project requires the freelancer to just create like social media posts. At a baseline, right, to meet the requirement of this project, all you need to do is creating Instagram posts that meet the brand requirements, making sure there's no spelling mistakes, and that the art looks good, right? Quote unquote is subjective. So that's like the baseline requirement, like, as a freelancer, right? But if you want to do better, right, then you need to figure out how to kind of like build next level relationship with your client, right? Which means that you want to be able to kind of like, provide them with updates on your progress every week, right? Giving them options with regards to, the artwork that you're providing them, making sure that you consider all the different things that, they care about, right? Following up with them regularly for revisions and edits. So not kind of like making it their job, but making sure that this is part of your process is going to kind of help you look very, very professional. And again, like make like life so much easier for your client as well. So again, like, good freelancers will kind of like go and like take care of that next step. The next one is obviously the most important one is to kind of like really understand what results like your clients want, right? So maybe your clients, have kind of like done a lot of Instagram post projects in the past. So being able to really kind of like look at those past projects and provide them with suggestions to improve engagement is very, very important. But again, to do that, to understand that, you need to first of all talk to your client a lot, gain their trust, so that they can share with you what their goal really is, what the result that they want is, right? So maybe they just care about like, oh, I just need to have like 10 posts that looks good. I don't care about like the visitors. I just need my Instagram page to be filled up, right? Or maybe they're like, no, like I need to kind of like get like the right traffic. I need to get like the right engagement from the right kind of people. So being able to understand all of that and then proactively suggest solutions to your clients and helping them achieve those results is going to be like the pinnacle of like quality in terms of freelancer and client engagement. Another example is, for example, in a public relation project, right? A PR project. So at a baseline level, meeting requirements could be as simple as like, okay, like I agreed that I'm going to connect this company with, 3 media partners. So that's all I'm going to do, and helping them with their PR write-up to make sure that it looks good, and that, this newspaper and news, websites are going to like pick up and like, on the news and basically put it on there and publish it on their website, right? So that's like the baseline requirement. But if you're kind of like good and you want to kind of take it to the next level, you might want to figure out a way to partner with your clients and joining them in their PR strategy meeting to their CEO, and to ensure that the CEO understands the strategy and are bought into it, and they're clear about like what they're trying to do, right? But ultimately, again, to achieve the result, maybe this person like, cares a lot more about how do I actually build like a better process internally to get like, my PR activity smooth, right? Smoothly done. So then you might actually want to kind of work together with your clients and understand what are some of the internal challenges they face, right? To help them make their job easier. Maybe that's all they care about. They just want to finish work at 5 o'clock, and not struggle with like, internal communication, a lack of process. So helping them like solve all of those things is a great, again, like a sign of a great relationship and a great, freelancer. And by the way, I'm saying all this, again, like the scope of work at different level are very different, right? So at the baseline, meeting requirements, the scope of work might be like, oh, it'll take 20 hours. But once you kind of like, include yourself in the client meeting, right? And join them with the CEO meeting, you need to prepare the presentation, you need to kind of like, go for the meeting. That could be another 5 hours. So it'll be 25 hours. And then to top that up, if you're kind of like, really trying to get like the best result for your client, you're really kind of helping them look into their PR processes internally and like, come up with like new ideas or solutions to restructure their team and, implement different tools and different processes, then that might actually take another 20 hours, right? So again, just because you are offering like, you're trying to kind of like, solve your client's problem at a deep level doesn't mean you don't get paid for it, right? Actually, the better you are as a freelancer and the better you are at identifying all of these opportunities, the more likely you are at, winning a bigger deal. So remember that, just because you want to achieve that high level of result doesn't mean that you don't get paid for your service. In fact, you might get paid more. So something to note as well. So then, what is the best practice for us to follow then to make sure that, you know, our clients are happy, right, throughout this engagement? Now, as I mentioned, I've already broken down, you know, the process or the client journey into 3 different steps. So the first part, the 3 steps, right, is discovery, deliberation, and decision. Here are some of the experience I've had, a small checklist for you. And don't worry about taking notes. I'll be posting this on YouTube so that you can actually rewatch it and just screenshot it later on. But essentially, it's very important, again, to understand the end goal of the customer during this sales stage, right? Because as I mentioned, one of the biggest concerns your clients have will stem around their motivation and, like, you know, what goals they want to achieve. The second one is to figure out during this stage, what have they tried before that failed? And the reason why this is important is because you want to know what not to do in an engagement process. And you want to know if they've worked with other freelancers, what wasn't working well in those situations, which made them engage you instead, right? So understanding that is very, very crucial to make sure that you are able to sidestep and avoid all the landmines that, you know, has been, you know, that's kind of like placed in that project from the very beginning, right? The third one is really to agree a detailed scope of work. And this, I think this is a no-brainer. Just having a very clear understanding with your client of, like, what is the final output is key to your success, right? That's baseline. Again, the next one that people don't think about a lot is sharing your methodology or way of working very, very clearly upfront, right? So again, depending on what kind of freelancing work you do, this could look very, very different for different people. So for example, if you are a designer, it could be, your process could be, okay, first we're going to have like a brainstorming meeting. Then we're going to have, like, you know, some very high level sketches of solution or, you know, output. And then we are going to have the high fidelity output at the end of the day, right? So like separating that into very clear stages and making sure that your clients are involved in every single stage is very important to make sure that, again, they understand, okay, this is how, like, you know, Putri work, this is how Rama worked. So it's just much easier for them to visualize how and kind of manage the expectation in terms of how they'll work with you. Do not overpromise. Okay, like, you know, if you cannot do something and you're kind of like unsure about like your ability to deliver that piece of work, do not say that you can, because that usually will cause a lot of issues down the line. Either you're stressed about delivering it, or your clients will be very upset that, you know, the output or the quality is not great. It's also very important to agree with your client what are the risks and challenges associated with that project upfront, just so that it's clear to everyone involved that, you know, these are some of the potential failure points, and therefore, like, you know, figuring out what are some of the things you can do upfront to mitigate that, right? So it could be things like, one of the risks that I face a lot with client is that I usually work maybe with, like, you know, the HR manager, let's say, of a company, right? But maybe this HR manager reports to the CEO. And actually, one of the potential risks in this project is that the CEO might change their mind about, like, you know, whether or not this project that I'm involved in is important or not. And that could be a roadblock for us working together effectively as you know, as a freelancer and as a client, right? So identifying all this risk upfront will help you mitigate, you know, like any of the issues that might come up in the future with regards to internal structure, with regards to their motivation. And that really helps eliminate any of the, you know, like lack of confidence and skepticism of your client very early on, because you show that you are very well prepared and you've thought about like all the different scenarios of how this project can go. And once you've kind of identified that, making sure that you have a contingency plan, right? So, you know, making sure that you have, like, you know, an agreement on, okay, what happens if there's a scope creep? You know, here's my rate card, and this is like how much I'm going to charge for additional hour of work, etc., etc. What happens if, like, you know, the project decides to, maybe the CEO decides to cancel the project, right? So having all of this contingency plan will really help you, again, crystallize any of the potential unknowns and like surface it so that your client feel confident going into the project with you. Now, in the next stage, during the execution stage, it's also very important to make sure that you have very clear way of working with your client. So setting up like working and communication cadence with them. So typically I will set up like a weekly call with the client, especially if it's a big project, right? To make sure that you're updating them with, you know, relevant information and relevant progress of the project. And the reason why you want to do this is because you do not want your client to be the one chasing you, because what will happen is that in a situation where there's no clear process, they will just WhatsApp you nonstop. They will just, you know, like email you anytime they want. And it's very difficult as a freelancer to start to process all of this information, and it becomes very messy, you know, once kind of like, you know, the communication channel is not established, right? So setting up all of this cadence or schedule in terms of like when you're going to update them, it really helps them formulate their thought. So they can also plan what they want to update you on a weekly basis based on the schedule, for example, right? And that's kind of like my second bullet point as well, which is making sure that during these meetings with the client, review meetings with the client, you provide relevant progress update. So it's not just like a meeting to just chit chat and talk about the project at a high level. No, you want to show them like, okay, this is the deliverable. This is where we are right now. We are in the process of making this decision. Do you have any concern? And kind of using that as a checkpoint as well for you and your client to make sure that the project is going along the right path and it's not, going the opposite direction of what the client expects, right? And this allows you to course correct really, really quickly and not over invest time into something that is wrong, right? So all of this cadence meeting and communication is super important to be established early. I typically will provide a written documentation of my decision and discussions together with the client so that again, they have no way of saying, oh no, I never said that. I never agreed to kind of do it this way. So if you document this clearly and you make sure that you send that document after every meeting, it's very easy for you to kind of go back to that and say, no, like we agreed that this is how you want it. I'm not going to make any more changes because, we've agreed on this. So this just helps you mitigate any potential issue in the future when the clients decide to change their mind on something or decide to blame you on, certain design decision or certain, certain things that you do in the project. So it's just a way to ensure that that it doesn't happen, right? And I typically set up what I call points of no return, which is basically checkpoint where once we pass this point, we're not going to go back again. So it could be as simple as like, if you are a writer, for example, it could be like, okay, here's all the research that I've done. Okay. And these are the outline of the article that I'm going to write. Okay. So once we've agreed on the outline, I'm not going to change it anymore, right? You can give me feedback and revisions on, the structure of the sentence. You can talk to me about like the style, all this stuff, but I'm not going to change the outline. I'm not going to restart my research again, right? So setting up all of these points of no return is really, really important as a freelancer, because otherwise you'll have to do rework so many times. And finally, I think one thing that is quite important as well is as a freelancer, obviously we provide service and clients will always have some comments about your work, right? They will always want revisions. So what's important is to agree with your client how you want to time box all of this revision to make sure that you don't go, that they don't go overboard with the number of revisions they ask. And at the same time, they actually follow a schedule of, providing you with feedback, right? The worst thing is if you are working on a timeline, let's say your project is due at the end of February and your client is the one who's not giving you any feedback for like weeks on end. And the challenge of that is that you are the one who's going to pay the price of trying to, catch up with the work to meet the deadline at the end of February because the client is not responding to you. So making sure that all of this revision process is set up properly is going to really help you take that client experience to the next level. And I'm going to keep this part short because it's just the debrief. But debrief is also a very important part of your engagement, right? So especially if you're working with a client long-term, you want to make sure that every single project is reviewed properly and all the things that the clients are happy with or unhappy with in a project are resolved at the end of the project so that when you go into the next project with them, you can avoid all of those mistakes and you can make sure that they have a better experience with you, right? So ask feedback on the output, discuss and collect insights on the ROI of the project. So you want to know, let's say if you're creating an article to generate new traffic or SEO, how is that, improving the traffic, right? How many clicks, how many views are you getting, right, from that article? Again, this helps you to figure out like how you can improve that output in the future. Ask them feedback on the process as well, right? And provide suggestions on future improvement. And this is important, which is kind of like to think about what are the next steps once you've kind of completed a project for a client, right? And what this does, it opens door for you to pitch or to propose for another deal or to close another deal and make sure that you have leads in your pipeline, right? So an example of that is, again, like for me, I'm a freelance consultant, right? So I do a lot of projects around strategy consulting and innovation consulting. So let's say the project that the client engages me on is related to figuring out what problems they are facing in an organization that, AI technology can solve, maybe, right? So at the end of that project, maybe I've identified, okay, here's the 5 areas you can leverage this tool or this technology to solve, right? And during the feedback or during the debrief session, what I would want to do as a freelancer, as a freelance consultant, is to figure out, okay, now that you have these 5 different options, how can you make the decision, right, to move forward with any one of these options, right? So they've asked me to identify 5 problems. I know logically that the next thing they're going to do is that they're going to choose one of the 5, or they're going to choose one of them or 2 of them, and they're going to figure out a way to work with an AI expert to solve that problem, right? So then my opportunity there is to kind of like, look into, the next step of that project, the life cycle of the project, and ask the clients if there's any opportunity for me to be involved in that next step, right? And provide some solutions early on, even during the debrief process. So that will help me secure the next phase of the project. And again, that just gives you credibility with the client, which kind of like just shows that, you are freelancers who's really thinking of like the next thing that they need as an organization or as a business. And you're already anticipating that for them before they even start thinking about it, right? So as they kind of like go into the next project, they're already thinking about like all your suggestions, and obviously who are they going to call if they like the suggestion? They're going to call you again, right? So you're going to get involved in the next project again. So that's kind of like what you want as well, to again make sure that client engagement continues for the long term, right? And of course, finally, if you're confident that you've done a good job, make sure that you ask for testimonials, because that is like gold as a freelancer. Okay, those are great best practices, right? Now, there are just some inevitable situation where you're gonna get into that, it's not ideal, right? So the question is, how do you kind of deal with them, right? So let me share 6 different situations that I typically encounter as a freelancer, and maybe share with you some of the steps that I used to take to kind of resolve those challenges. Now, the first and likely the most common one in any freelancing situation is that clients just goes on and on and on, changing the scope and expanding the scope of your project. Even though you've already agreed that ABC is going to be the scope, no, they're going to do A1, A2, A3, D, E, F, G, right? So how do you manage that? So what's an example of that, right? So a typical situation is a client adding more elements into a project, right? So for example, in like, maybe you're doing illustration and you've agreed that, oh, we're going to do line illustration. It's going to be like this. There's going to be like 3 main elements. And the clients just keep adding stuff like, oh, can we like, add a logo here? Can you also help me craft like, this character? Can you add like a logo that has like, this color in 2 different colors? I want to see the options. So that's an example. It could even be things like, oh, instead of like just creating one Instagram post, do you mind like creating a story as well? Can you help me do a LinkedIn version of the image? So like the scope just keeps expanding, right? So in that situation, like what do you do, right? What do you kind of like, what are some of the things that you can do to kind of like minimize damage to you and your business, right? So first, and this is something that I'm going to repeat throughout all the sticky situations that you're in as a freelancer, is ask and discover, right? And this is again, back to my earlier point on the fact that a lot of clients' concern, right, are rooted around their motivations, which is their motives and their personal goals, right? So what you want to figure out, right, in this situation is, why are they asking for all of these changes? Do they feel like, is it because the value that you bring, like they don't feel like it's enough? They feel like they're overpaying you. That's why they want you to work harder for them, right? So understanding all of this motivation for their behavior is very important for you to kind of like identify the right solution, right? And in my experience, when clients go into like scope creep or changes, there's usually a few reasons. One of them is stakeholder management. By stakeholder management, what I mean is that they're not the one who actually wants to expand the scope. Oftentimes it is their boss or it is their client. They also have a client, right? So it is a client who's like, oh, like this is not good enough. Like, like I don't like this. Can you change this? Can you add this? Can you add that? But your client themselves, they do not know how to manage their client, right? So figuring out like, how to kind of like solve that, is going to be what's, going to solve this entire situation for you, right? So in a way, you have to help them manage their client or help them manage their boss, right? So that could be, because if that's the root cause, then that's something that you need to figure out with them. The other reason why scope creep happens usually is because there's a fear of failure. So your client might not be confident about like, their initial plan. They might have some doubt about like, your ability to execute or the success of this project. So understanding that will again help you figure out like why they're asking for all these changes. And also figuring out like what is the right way to change so that they'll feel confident moving forward with the project, right? And that brings me to the second point, which is the second step, which is once you've kind of understood like their challenges, you want to anchor what you've done, right? Again, what that means is to remind them the effort that you've put into this project so far, right? And anchor it and connect it back to your original scope, and explain to them that, you know, anything that, you know, is on top of that is going to require additional effort, right? And if that requires additional effort, that means either they have to pay you more, right? Or they need to take your time away from other parts of the project, right? So maybe, let's say, part of your engagement requires you to write an article and also like create a design, you know, like an illustration as part of the article, right? So maybe that means that, okay, like I'm not going to do the illustration anymore because it seems like you need a lot of help on the article, right? So again, reallocating that can be like the next step that you have, you know, the next discussion that you have with your client. The third step I would suggest is usually to plan for further changes or leakages by setting cost parameter with your client, right? So this means that you've already kind of like experienced one situation where the client has changed the scope significantly, right? So to prevent that from happening again, right, what you can do is potentially have like a discussion around, okay, if this further changes again the scope, then I have to charge you X amount, right? So setting all of these cost parameters will really help the client think twice before they commit to a change, right? And they'll also make sure that you are protected in situations where the scope creep is just too big, right? So you'll get paid and compensated for it at least. So that's a very important point. And as I've mentioned earlier today as well, setting up points of no return will also help. That prevents scope creep really well, because let's say you are in a consulting project, right? And part of your consulting project is you do research first, and then after that you do like an interview, and then after that you kind of like create recommendation. So like agreeing on like, you know, okay, like this is the research that I've done and here's the things that I've discovered, these are the insights. Do we agree, right? Once we agree on this, I'm not going to go back and do any more research, right? So setting up all of these milestones will really help you prevent clients from going back and forth about like the scope of the project. Another sticky situation is unlimited revision. This is again very common, right? So clients keep coming back to you and say, oh, like, can you please change this just a little bit? And then they keep coming back like 10 times, you know, for all small changes, or they can't decide and they just keep kind of like, you know, flip-flopping between two different like options. So that makes it very difficult for you to work as a freelancer again. And usually what I find is that this is the bane of all of freelancers' existence, which is the project will never finish because there is no clear point in which the freelancer can say that, no, I've already delivered everything. This is in good form and this is aligned with our agreement and I can close this project. Because clients can just keep coming back and say, hey, by the way, do you mind just doing one more thing, right? So how do you kind of like deal with it, right? Again, same thing. Start with ask and discover. But in this case, you want to understand whether or not it is because you have, you know, an unclear process with your client, or that the client has an unclear process internally, right? Misalignment of requirements. So maybe they actually say they want A when in reality they want B, right? So understanding that upfront will really, really help you kind of like, you know, limit any of the potential revisions. And what I call purpose amnesia, which is clients just forget why they want this done in a certain way, right? So at the beginning of your project, usually you already have kind of like had a long discussion with them about, oh, like, you know, the purpose of this is to get more engagement, or the purpose of this is so that we can like target a completely new market, right? But as you kind of like go along the project and deliver all this like output, the clients tend to forget, like, oh, like, I don't know why we started this project in the first place. And therefore they keep asking you to change things because they have no idea what they are trying to achieve, right? So reminding them of all of those like, you know, goals that you set up at the beginning is going to be really helpful in preventing any like unlimited, you know, or any like unnecessary revisions along the way. The second thing to do is to make sure that you define all of the revisions upfront clearly, right? So say like, oh, it's going to be 2 revisions, 3 revisions, and every revision will only wait for like a week for you to get back to us. If you take more than a week, we will move on to the next step already, and we'll consider like, you know, that revision done, right? And the third thing is to track how many revisions you've made, so that the clients know exactly like how much effort you've put into accommodating their requirements and requests along the way, right? So these are like some important steps that you can take as a freelancer. The third sticky situation is what I call like working with below the gap clients. So below the gap is basically in reference to clients that do not have any decision-making power, right? So they always have to go back to their boss and ask, oh, like, is Putri's work good? What do you think about this? You know, the client keeps misunderstanding the messages, you know, because, you know, maybe their boss tell them, oh, I want ABC, and then they tell you, oh, Like, can you do CDE, right? And all of that becomes like, messed up. And again, like, it confuses everyone. So when you create something, go back to the client goes back to their boss, and their boss are like, no, this is not what I want, right? So working with clients who could not make a decision is very, very difficult, right? So how do you deal with them, right? So again, one, ask and discover, right? Figure out what is going on internally with them, right? Why are they, why are they not able to convince their boss that this is a good result? Why are they not able to basically get the buy-in from the internal team, right, on your deliverable, right? Making sure that the project is clearly prioritized, right? Sometimes the project is just not important enough for their boss. So they're like, oh, I don't care. Let's just keep delaying this. And a lot of that will cause a lot of delays for you, revisions and stuff like that. So understanding all of that is really important. Once you've kind of like done that and understood like their challenges, most of the time for clients like this, what you need to do is to help them look good in front of their boss. That's all you need to do, right? Because they are not a decision maker, right? Their role is to convince the decision maker, right? And to do that, they need to build credibility in front of their bosses, right? So your job as a freelancer is to make sure that they have that credibility, right? And how do you do that? There's a lot of different strategies, but one of the things you can do is potentially go into a meeting together with your boss and help kind of like clarify what are the project priorities. You can prep your clients, okay, to meet with their bosses so that they can present, the right plan and the right engagement strategy so that their boss feel like, they're doing a good job, and that will help you progress in your project, right? So an example would be, again, in my experience, I've worked with a client who do not have like the capability to make any decision because their boss is the one who gets to veto on everything and to kind of like, say, oh, like this is the budget for this project. This is when we're going to continue. So what I did was I created a presentation, and I actually prepped my client by getting them to practice that presentation with me so that they can present to their boss about the plan and the strategy so that I can, as a freelancer, I can move like my work forward. Otherwise, I'm just stuck in that loop of revisions, right, with my buyer, right? So setting up your clients for success is very important, and making them look really good in front of your bosses is really important. So in this situation where you're working with a client that cannot make any decision, you want to make sure that they look good in front of their bosses and give them all the tools and resources they need to do that. The fourth one is again very common. We have clients that cannot make decision, okay? So the clients just keep like, going back and forth with certain decisions. They are the ones who create the delays in your project. They keep changing direction and scope. They might even like pause the engagement and say, oh, like, let's not continue this, let's pause and like, figure out the next step internally first, and then we'll come back to you, right? So how do you deal with that, right? So again, first, ask and discover, clarify, remind them again why this job or why this project is important for them, right? What kind of results are they hoping to get? Right? And understand internally what are some of the potential blockers that they're facing, right? That is making them indecisive about moving forward with you or moving forward with your collaterals, right? Is it budget? Are they going through a restructuring? Is this project not a priority anymore? So understanding all that will really help you understand what's going on in their head, right? Now, once you've done all that, the next step is you want to create a red thread, right? Red thread means to connect, right? The project that you're doing now with the ultimate goal that the client is trying to achieve, right? So making sure that you remind them essentially why this project is important in the first place and why completing this project will help them get closer to their goal, right? So in situations where clients are indecisive, you want to anchor it back to their goals and make sure that they know exactly why this project will contribute to that goal, right? The other option is to potentially offer some pivot options to your client. So pivot options mean, okay, let's maybe change the way we approach this project, right? Based on the goals that they have, right? Or ultimately, if the client still cannot decide and just keeps flip-flopping, rather than working on a project with a client that has no clarity on where they're going with the project, it's better to offer the client to pause the project indefinitely. But make sure that you get paid for the work that you've done so far, okay? And the reason for that is because you do not want to work on something that will end up requiring you to do more rework or revisions, right? So tell them that, look, if you haven't decided, it's okay. Let's pause the project. We'll extend the timeline, okay? We'll pick this up again in February, in March, once you've had your strategy meeting for Q1, right? That will allow you to free up a lot more of your time and not stress about this. At the same time, not do any unnecessary work. And it will also allow the client to formulate their ideas and their thoughts about how they want to move forward with you as a freelancer, right? So again, an additional idea that you can tap into to make sure that you don't do unnecessary work. The fifth type of situation is you have clients who are micromanagers, right? So this is clients who are constantly on your back, asking you to do things, telling you like every single changes that's going on, keep making decisions on your behalf. Like you are a designer, but they're telling you like, oh no, like do it this way, do it that way, use that color, use this font. So it's super micromanaging, right? In every single aspect of your work. So how do you kind of deal with this client, right? So typically for a client like this, what they feel is that they are afraid that the project is going to fail and they don't trust you enough, right? The second one is that they just don't see progress and they're very impatient. That's why they're trying to kind of like, get updates from you and trying to like push you to move forward again and again and again. So the strategy to work with this client is to define very clear, regular updates with them. So maybe like you can tell them, once a week, I'll do a 30-minute call with you and we're going to talk about ABC. Making sure that that's all really clear will really help you make sure that the clients do not micromanage you throughout the week. Otherwise, the clients can very, very easily just keep like, driving streams of information to you like along the way. Sorry, give me a second. Apologies for that. The next thing is making sure that you're providing the clients with a very clear update on the project every single time, right? You're doing the cadence meeting. This again gives them like the trust and the confidence that the project's moving well and that the decision that you're making is aligned and helping them get the goals that they want. The final situation that you might find yourself in as a freelancer is clients that ghost you completely. So this happens a lot of time when clients just do not respond to any of your calls, they do not reply to you, it takes forever to respond, and this is bad for you because it just means that the project will never end, right? So how do you deal with that, right? Again, establish clear timeline and decision-making process, right? So do not go into a project without a clear idea of how you want to, make certain decisions, how you want to kind of keep your clients updated. Making sure that all of that is established at the beginning is really, really important so that your client do not just go like missing completely, right? The other alternative that I use if clients just do not show up is that I will provide them with clear written updates on like every single discussion that we have. And the reason for this is because you want to make sure that you have, at least you can say that you've done the work and you can actually send those written update as a proof that you've done something. And that allows you to kind of move on with your project without having to wait for their response, right? Of course, all of this has to be pre-agreed upfront with things like, in your scope of work, to agree on things like, okay, like we're gonna do 3 revisions. Every revision will be like 1 week apart. And if you don't actually respond during this 1 week window, we're gonna move forward and assume that you're okay with our project, right? So making sure that you have all of this established at the beginning will again prevent you from having any of the challenges around client ghosting you. But despite all of these steps that you take, all the goodwill that you have, and that you want to build with the client, sometimes things just don't work out with certain clients, right? How do you know if things are not getting, better, right? So you're spending more time and resources than agreed on a project, right? Your client is negatively affecting your work on other projects, right? So they are essentially making you do worse work for your other clients. That's not good, right? The third thing is you're not able to do more work, right? So maybe you're paid to kind of like, spend 10 hours a week with this client, but the reality is that they're sucking up like 40 hours a week of your time. And that significantly diminishes your ability to make money as a freelancer, right? So not good, right? You're not able to do other projects. The last thing, I would say like is the most important like telltale sign that the client is not a great fit for you, is that every single time they email you, call you, or text you, you just feel afraid. You're just paranoid all the time about like what they're going to change, what they're going to do, right? So these are just some telltale signs that your clients are probably not a good fit for you. So first of all, when this happens, take a deep breath and acknowledge that sometimes things just don't work out, right? Sometimes not everything, that you do will be successful, right? So acknowledge that first and foremost, and don't blame yourself too much, right? And what you want to do next is to figure out a way to give feedback to your client, right? So what I usually do is that I'll organize a time to have a discussion with the client. I'll prepare for that meeting, make sure that I have all my bullet points, talking about the challenges I face as a freelancer. Before I kind of like go into the meeting as well, I've already prepared some contingency plan, right? About what the client might say. So I've come up with like different scenarios. If the client say this, then I'll say this. If the client say that, then I'll say this. If the client's unhappy, I'll provide them with this option. So I'll make sure that I'll come into the meeting like well prepared. And I'll start by asking feedback from the client, because you do not want to come in with all guns blazing and blame the client for every single thing that you're experiencing, right? So what you want to do is first and foremost, give them a platform to express any discontent, any unhappiness that they might feel, because that might give you insights about what is really going on in this project that is wrong, right? Rather than you acting on your assumption, right? So give them a chance to share their feedback first, right? Now, once you've done that and once you've heard all of their feedback, then you can share your feedback and your experience, right? In the previous Freelancer Masterclass, we talked about this technique called the It Seems framework. So I would suggest that you go back to the previous episode and just kind of like go up and look up on that. That is under negotiation. So check that out. That's this great way to kind of like provide feedback without being too subjective and too personal, right? So it just detaches, the personal attack element from the feedback, right? So the client doesn't feel like they are, being assessed by you or being criticized by you, right? So use that framework when you're kind of giving feedback to your client. Now, to kind of like connect that again to why you're having this discussion, explain to your client why those things that they did that you want to achieve as a freelancer, and ultimately what they want to achieve for their business, right? So connect those feedback and behavior with the ultimate goal that the client's trying to achieve and show them that it's not great. This is not helping neither you or them achieving the goals, right? And then from there, you want to agree on a clear next step. Excuse me. I think, yeah. Once you kind of figure that out, what you want to do is you want to agree on a clear next step of what to do, with regards to those behavior. And if things continue to suffer, you want to also have contingency plan set up, right? So, you might want to reduce your scope. You want to charge more if they continue to the scope creep, right? Or they continue to take up more of your time, or even like potentially terminating the relationship altogether. And if things still do not get any better, you just have to break up with them, right? Sometimes you just have to fire your client, right? So how do you go about to do that, right? I've done this before as well. It's not easy, but the reason why you want to let go of your client is because they're just torturing you emotionally and financially and physically sometimes. Like it takes a lot of your time working on their projects. And it prevents you from scaling your business, which is not great, right? So sometimes you just have to fire a client, right? So for me, sometimes I feel like it's much better for me to cut my losses, even though I might actually lose money, or not lose money maybe, but like not make as much money from the project. I might actually provide them with options around giving them some sort of a partial refund for the engagement, right? And exit the project. I just don't want to have anything to do with it anymore, right? Or ask for a discounted payment for the project, right? So let's say, the project is at like, 50% and you want to take it to the 60% point and then you just want to exit from there. Then you can just like, agree on, okay, look, like we're going to deliver this particular deliverable. Once it's done, I think like that's it. We're not going to be able to do kind of like, support you anymore. And you can give a bunch of different reasons like, or like, we have this other client engagement that is starting. And because the timeline of your project has stretched beyond that, we don't think we can accommodate unless you want to, do this and do that. So again, like you can negotiate a little bit, but usually like once you can kind of like get to this point, it's already pretty firm that you want to terminate the relationship, right? But point C, 1C is that you really want to take the project to a point where they can actually do a good handover, right? So you do not want to, finish a project midway where things are not done, like nothing, all the loose ends are not tied. That's very difficult for the client to kind of like, do anything about it, right? So make sure that if you're terminating the relationship, bring it to at least a point where you can actually do a handover properly, right? And to do all that, once you kind of prepare all that, Make sure that you organize a meeting with your client and discuss all of these reasons why you want to terminate the relationship, and just announce to them that you are not able to continue the project anymore. So make it a statement, right? Bullet point number 4, offer alternative solution. Okay, don't just leave them hanging. Tell them that, oh, we can connect you with other freelancers if you like, agencies, or like, maybe you can like look at this potential tools to help you can like scale your or like solve your problem. So like offer them like different alternative to solving this problem, right? Oftentimes clients are not going to just let you go, right? They want you to kind of like commit to the end of the engagement. So be prepared to negotiate, because they will probably say things like, oh no, we're going to change, we're going to stick with the scope. Make sure that you have like a response to that, right? Usually for me, my response would be like, either they will pay me a lot more, or like, we'll have to reduce the scope, or, whatever else, like you want to get like into other projects, whatever else. Make sure that you have like a ready, you have a put aside, some bullet points ready to negotiate with them. Or if you do not want to kind of like work with them anymore, just stand your ground and say, give them a firm no and kind of stick with your reason, right? But throughout this process, please remain calm, rational, and polite, because again, sometimes saying no to a client or firing a client could be a good thing. That just shows that you are very professional. You do not want to, provide them with subpar results. You do not want to commit to something that you cannot deal with or you cannot complete. So it may actually be a good experience for the client to kind of like see that, look, like this person admit that they're not able to kind of like work with us because of ABC, and they're kind of like telling me up front, and they're terminating the relationship rather than forcing it to work and ultimately delivering bad result, right? And as a result of that, to kind of like make sure that you preserve that relationship, you have to kind of like remain professional and polite throughout the entire like firing situation, right? So that they can still give you a referral, and maybe they'll still want to engage you in the future as well. And that's it. That's kind of like really like some of my best practices and bullet points and experience working with difficult clients and managing clients. So if you have any feedback for me, do let me know. Before I close the session, I just want to announce we have one last event in this series, and the topic of that event will be to talk about different tools and resources that freelancers can use to help them scale their business. So watch out for Eventbrite and follow us on Ravelry's LinkedIn page to get updates on that. So what's next after our last Freelancer Masterclass? So right now, Ravelry is actually developing a completely new product called Solos. So we are still in a very early stage of developing this. We're still under stealth. And what we are doing as part of this project is that we're actually running an invite-only mentorship program for freelancers. And what we do is that we work together with a small group of freelancers to really help them double and triple their monthly income as a freelancer. So what we do is that we kind of like interview them and understand like what are their challenges as a freelancer, whether it's finding a client, delivering a project, leveling up their skills, stuff like that. And we will personalize strategy to help them kind of like solve those problems and really take their business to the next level. This mentorship program is completely free, and I will personally be your mentor and guide throughout the entire process. It'll be a 2 or 3 months engagement, and we'll meet like on a regular basis to kind of like discuss your progress and help you troubleshoot any challenges that you have. And you have a direct line to me anytime you have any challenges around like building your business. At the same time, once I understood and my team understood the kind of like the business or the freelancing services that you offer, we will help you find clients as well and really help you kind of like build your baseline client network so that you can really kind of like scale your business from there. If you're interested to be part of this, we do need you to kind of like commit with us for about 2 to 3 months. But if you're interested, follow us on our IG at solos.work if you're interested, and just DM us via IG if you're interested to join. We only have a few more spots left. I don't have that much bandwidth, and we are not going to take a lot of freelancers. So we don't have that many left. So if you're interested, please DM us as soon as possible. One of our team members will reach out to you, and then we will assess whether or not you are a good fit for this program. And if you are, we'd love to kind of like welcome you on board and join us in this engagement, in this mentorship program, and really help you kind of take your business to the next level. And additionally, I think before we end this session, I really love to kind of like get your feedback again. We only have 3 questions, so you can scan the QR code or you can copy and paste well, you can't copy and paste. Let me try to copy and paste on behalf and drop in the chat. You can use the link to access our Google form. There's only 3 questions. And at the same time, I think via this form, you can also drop your email so that we can invite you to our invite-only Discord community channel, where we are actually building a community of serious freelancers who really want to take their business to the next level, and kind of like use that as a platform for you to kind of like network with relevant people, share projects. We oftentimes as a company, we announce like new jobs or new clients that's looking for freelancers there, so you can find new leads there as well. And we'll also share learnings, resources, and best practices there, so you are always kind of like updated as a freelancer in this within this community. So do kind of like join us there if you're interested as to be part of that group, and we are happy to kind of like again invite you into this invite only group. Okay, at this point in time, I will pause and see if there's any question from anyone about today's session, or about even like the mentorship program, or about like the Discord community that we're creating. Cool.
Hello.
Oh, hey Chris. Yep.
First of all, I'm sorry I'm late.
No worries.
Yeah, I missed lots of it because I'm sorry I'm late.
No worries. Yeah, we'll be posting this on YouTube, so you can actually listen to this again.
I see. Thank you. So I want to ask about the DMs just now.
Yep.
About the mentorship program. It mentioned that I should, if I want to join, I should DM solo work. So I just DM it, just like, oh,
Yep.
so
follow our Instagram here.
Yeah.
At solos.work, and just drop a DM saying that, oh, you've heard about the mentorship program, from Ricky, and that you're interested in joining. And then one of our team members will reach out to you with more details.
Okay. So how does this mentor work?
Yeah, so what we'll do is that we will actually create a small group of freelancers, and we will basically meet regularly to kind of like talk about what are the challenges they face as a freelancer. So, it'll be very much like a mini MBA for freelancer, right? Essentially. So we'll talk about like sales process. We'll talk about like, building a system for you to engage with to kind of like scale your backend processes. We'll talk about managing clients. We'll talk about invoicing, pricing, how do you price your business, how do you charge your clients. We'll talk about all of that. And all of the engagement will be directly with me or my team member. And we will be providing you with, milestones, with like best practices to help you resolve a lot of issues. We'll also provide you with potential leads if we find any relevant ones to help you kind of like, grow your business as well and your income. And yeah, so that's kind of like really the goal. And we'll be introducing you to new tools as well that we develop internally at Solos. So you can actually leverage those early stage tools to reach out and kind of like sell more and kind of like grow your freelance business.
I see. It sounds interesting, and I am interested with that program. Is there any catch?
The catch is that we do need you to commit with us for at least 2 to 3 months. Maybe I'll explain to you why we're doing this. So we believe that we have a methodology and a framework that will help like freelancers scale their business, but we need to test this with a few freelancers and make sure that we can be successful with like, this small group, right? Once we are able to get success from this small group, we want to scale it to a few thousand freelancers. And therefore, what we need is for you to kind of commit with us for 2 to 3 months. It's not every day. We just need to talk to you maybe like 1 hour every 2 weeks, and help you kind of like figure out like any of your challenges, and kind of like really kind of like build a system around your freelance business. That's all we need in terms of commitment. And we'll also be getting you to use some of the tools that we're developing internally. So that's kind of like part of, I guess, the process, the framework that we're testing, to see if those tools are going to help you as a freelancer as well. I can't share too much about those tools because they're still under stealth mode, but if you join and you DM our team, we will be giving you a demo of the tool so you can understand a bit more about what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I will be interested to join, so I'll DM the Instagram.
Yeah, sure thing. Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you for the answers.
No worries. Okay, cool. If there's nothing else, then thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. I know it's a really small group, but hopefully it's useful. And if you miss anything, Chris, again, like I'll be posting this on YouTube and you'll be able to see it. Okay, thanks guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
till the sun